Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another Wednesday live CEU webinar. Today, we are continuing the series on caregiver burnout prevention. So as usual, we still have a couple minutes before we get started. Hello, Jim. Hello, Thomas, Lisa, and Heidi. Good to see you maybe it's not too early where you are. It is still early morning here early-ish here in Tennessee. Hello, Adriana. Let me take off my fancy glove because that's so attractive. Alrighty there. I hope everybody has had a decent week so far. We are halfway through the week. We'll be almost exactly halfway through the week as soon as today's presentation is done. Woohoo! And I hope you've got a good rest of your week planned. Hello, Anna. Good to see you. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to go over the emotional and cognitive aspects of caregiver burnout prevention, and then we're going to segue into exploring the physical, interpersonal, emotional, and cognitive impacts and interventions for persons with chronic diseases. And we're going to be very broad with that in terms of how we define chronic illness, from diabetes to COPD and even cancer. So we'll take a look at that. About another minute before we get going. Hello, Katie and Dr. Darlene. Hello, DeWitt and Mark. And I know if you're a therapist, you are a caregiver. If you're a parent, you are a caregiver. If you are a teacher, you are a caregiver. And we do want to recognize that. Hello, Terry. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's presentation on the interpersonal aspects of caregiver burnout and what we can do to try to prevent that. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Snipes. In this presentation, we'll identify inter- and intrapersonal signs of burnout. So, signs of burnout in your relationship with others as well as yourself. We'll explore inter- and intrapersonal causes of burnout in caregivers, and then we'll identify strategies to maintain healthy, supportive relationships with self and other. So, symptoms, causes, and strategies. In terms of signs of caregiver burnout, one group of signs that we see when we're talking about inter- and intrapersonal is a lack of self-awareness. When people are getting burned out, they tend to not realize how burned out they are. They're just on autopilot, got to get it done, don't think, don't talk, don't feel, just do. And that causes problems. Obviously, if people are not engaging in self-care, then they will have more difficulty dealing with life on life's terms. There's a loss of empathy with others, a loss of compassion for self and other. Now, remember, empathy is the ability to experience and understand someone else's feelings. And compassion is the ability to have feelings of care for someone, for self and others. So they are different. People stop self-care activities. That's another sign of intrapersonal burnout. And reducing hobbies, recreation, and social interaction. What do all these things have in common? They all take energy and time, which caregivers often feel like they don't have. And sometimes they may not. I mean, there are times that are hopefully few and far between that you really don't have a minute to come up for a breath. But hopefully, most of the time, you can carve out some time for yourself. And we'll talk about that. Now, when I talk about, you just can't take a second to breathe, If you're a doctor in an ER, if you are a teacher on a field trip, if you are a caregiver and something's going on at home. There are some times where your caregiving requires 100% of your attention and you can't just say, hey, going to take a break for a minute. But we want to try to make sure that that's not 24/7, 365. People are much more efficient at doing what they need to do, including caregiving, and much more accurate, fewer mistakes are made when they're rested and recharged. And I point that out because a lot of people, when we start talking about burnout prevention, say, well, I don't have the time. I can't. You can. And it's important that you do. When you get burned out, it's like a phone with a dead battery. Not very useful. It's a brick. Charging a battery while you're using the phone takes a lot longer than if you allow it to rest and recharge. You just plug it in, set it on the table. It recharges a lot faster. The same thing is true for us. Sorry, I got a scratchy throat today. A lack of self-awareness when we're on that autopilot leads to a loss of self-care, a loss of empathy with others, and a loss of compassion for ourselves and others. What do we need to do? Well, we need to maintain that self-awareness. Ideally, you pay attention to your battery meter, and when it gets to be about 50%, you reduce your activity and start recharging. Now, what does that look like? My battery gets down to about 50% during the day. What am I going to do? Maybe I'm going to sit down in the easy chair over in the corner and close my eyes for 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be an hour. Don't want it to be an hour. I'm going to screw up my circadian rhythms. Maybe I'll go downstairs and I'll make a cup of coffee and I will sit and watch the birds for a minute. Recharge. Allow my brain to kind of go blank for a minute and recharge. It's a lot easier to again, recharge if you're not also trying to do 6 other things. If I think I'm recharging while I'm making dinner, that's not recharging. I'm still engaging my brain and my body. How can we increase self-awareness aside from just checking in? Well, start with a mindfulness check-in for sure. In the morning, when you wake up, before you get out of bed, before you start caregiving, unless you've got an infant at home and then who knows, but ask yourself, how rested and charged am I? What is my body battery? And I have a body battery that is determined by my Garmin, and it's never seemed to be very accurate. So you need to check in with yourself and think, how do I feel? Am I thinking, oh, that coffee better be strong? Or am I thinking, hey, today's going to be a good day? What are my needs right now? I may have a lot of wants, but what do I need? If I am sore, if I am sleep deprived, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, what do I need from myself and from others? Doesn't mean I'm going to get everything, but since it's a need, it's something we really need to prioritize. Once I identify what my needs are, I may look at what must be done today. There are a lot of things that would be nice to get done. I remember when my kids were little, my son, I've shared with y'all before, he had wicked gastric reflux. And until we got it diagnosed and got him on appropriate medication, he required a lot of attention. Anytime he would recline, that stuff would back up, even if his tummy was empty. That stomach acid would back up and he'd start to cry. So there was a lot of trying to keep him in the right position. And, I also wanted to play with him and, enjoy having a child at home. So there was the must take care ofs, and then there was the, must be a mom sort of thing. But I was prioritizing him. I was caregiving for him. And we see the same thing if you're taking care of an older adult, for example. There may be times where there's a lot that they require. And all right, so what must be done? I have to do these things for my caregivee, whoever that happens to be. I also need to get the laundry done. and get the shopping done so we can, whatever. All right. Well, do you have to get the laundry done? Well, maybe you do. Maybe you don't have any clean drawers left, and that's okay. Do the laundry. Dry the laundry. Does it have to be folded and put away today? Would I like to do it? Yes. Would it be ideal if I could do it? Yes. But if that stuff doesn't get folded and put away today, it's not going to harm me, and it's not going to harm my caregivee. Looking at going to the grocery store. Well, yeah, ideally, I'd go to the grocery store so I can make dinner or whatever. But if I've got other things, if my caregivee needs a lot of something today, I may have to adjust. I remember one time my son got sick and he had an ear infection and stuff. I wasn't going to drag his happy little butt or unhappy little butt to the store and go grocery shopping. So what did we do? We ordered in. And is it ideal? Do I like paying for, it's expensive to order in, but sometimes you have to make that compromise. Or sometimes maybe you call somebody up and go, hey, neighbor, when you're on your way home, would you mind stopping by the store and picking up a gallon of milk for me? You don't have to do everything. So going to the grocery, it wasn't that you had to go to the grocery, it's that you had to get food. And there are multiple ways to get food. These days, and I'm forgetting about all this, these days you can get food delivered from the grocery store directly to your house. And a lot of times it's free if you order a certain amount. But even if it's not, it's still a lot cheaper than ordering fast food. Anyhow, and again, cooking takes time. Doing dishes takes time. Sometimes you don't got that time. Like my English today, sorry. Ask yourself, once you figure out what must be done today, what do we have to do so everybody stays safe and healthy? That's really what we're getting at. Is it, sometimes people won't be totally happy, but are we keeping them safe and healthy? Who can help with what must be done and my needs? A lot of people forget that last part. It's like, okay, who can help with what must be done? But also, who can help with my needs? If I need a break, who can help me? And yeah, the first person on this list is the caregivee. I know that's a radical thought, isn't it? Too often, we don't give caregivees credit for what they can do, and we may baby them too much. I remember, again, when my kids were little, there were times I was like, my kingdom to be able to go to the bathroom in peace, and not have those little hands coming under the door. Mom, when are you coming out? And that's okay to say, you know what? I am going to go back to the back. I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll be out in 15 minutes. I want you to stay, if we're talking to a child, I want you to stay right here, play with your toys. And if there's an emergency, you can come get me. And my kids got the hang of that pretty quickly about what was emergency and what wasn't. And I was suddenly able to take a shower, maybe not a long one, but I was able to take a shower and I was able to go to the bathroom without getting interrupted with, Mommy. And that's important. We need to have our time for our self-care, our time to decompress. The same thing is true if you're taking care of an older adult, for example. They have needs, but if they need a drink, for example, and maybe they can't get it for some reason, they're not ambulatory. If they go 15 minutes without that drink, 99.9% of the time, that's not going to harm them. Do they want it right now? Maybe. But can they wait 15 minutes? Maybe. So the caregivee can help by giving you some space, for example. The caregivee can help if you've got people who are ambulatory, children or older adults. Help you with some things. Would you mind helping me make dinner? Would you mind helping me put away the dishes? And we can empower people to assist us in our own care and their care. And that isn't harmful. That is actually helpful because people feel, again, more empowered, less vulnerable if they are partaking, if they are interacting. We can ask family, friends, and I put church fellowship here because I know a lot of churches have a caregiver board where people will pitch in to make meals when somebody comes home from the hospital after having surgery or a baby or something. A lot of congregations people will volunteer to make meals and bring them over. They'll volunteer to help with some of the lawn care if needed or what have you. And that can be super helpful. Reach out, find out what's out there. Reach out to your family and friends. Believe it or not, unless you're constantly asking for things, which you're probably not if you're a caregiver, you're probably giving more than you're taking. Believe it or not, it actually strengthens your relationship with people when they feel like they can help, when they feel useful. It's like, hey, they need me. Cool. Obviously, there are limits. You don't want to overburden somebody. But thinking that people will get angry if you ask them to do something, a lot of that is our own stuff. A lot of that is mind reading, where we're assuming that they're going to get angry. If somebody asked us to do something, would we get angry? Ask yourself that. A lot of times, most of the time, when I ask that of caregivers, they say, of course not. I'd be happy to help. Well, hello. Other people feel the same way. So give people a chance to help you out. If you can afford it, paid caregivers or domestic assistants can be really helpful. Regardless of the age or the condition of the caregivee, it can be really helpful. And again, it's expensive, so that's not something everybody can afford. If you are working with somebody who is, especially an older adult that's on Medicare, you can get physician-ordered home health services. And it's intermittent. It's not something that's going to happen all the time, but it's certainly something that can be taken advantage of. And then there's also short-term respite care. Unfortunately, again, this is more for the older adults and for people who are in hospice, where they, especially hospice, may have a hospice facility that somebody can go to for 3 to 5 days in order to give the home caregiver a break, in order to let them sleep through the night. And that's something you've got to determine for yourself. And with that caregiving, is this something that works? Also, find out in your local area, just kind of Google whatever your city and state is, and Medicare benefits. There are a lot of benefits that you may not know you actually can access, especially with a doctor's order. And it's important to check on that. If you have Medicare Advantage plans, then there are even more benefits. I know I sound like the commercial on TV now, but it's true that they do have more benefits that are available to you. Think about what can be simplified. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier when I talked about the needs. Do I need to make a 3-course meal tonight? Or can I order in? Can I simplify and make a casserole? How can I simplify what needs to be done? And a lot of times we make things too difficult. When I make pizza, I love to make pizza from scratch. I make the dough from scratch. I make the sauce from scratch. Right now, I don't make the cheese from scratch, but everything else comes from the garden or the flour from the grocery store. But I like to do it myself. And it takes a long time, for the bread to rise and everything else. I can simplify. I can buy a pre-made pizza crust. And I can buy pre-made sauce and just add a few seasonings to it to make it taste better if I have to. And sometimes that is a choice I need to make because I have these other things that must get done. And it starts feeling overwhelming if I think, hey, I've got to spend 3 hours in the kitchen. So that is important. What is it that I can simplify? And then the daily huddle. Daily huddle is important for people who are involved in caregiving and people who might be able to help you with your caregiving. Communicating to them, you can't just assume they know what your needs are. Communicating to them what is needed. If you've got multiple people caring for somebody, like, at home, you've got multiple adult caregivers, or, if you've got an older adult, you may have multiple adult caregivers. Written and shared schedules can be very helpful, and lists of things that need to be done, because they reduce the cognitive load. You don't have to think, did I ask somebody to do this? Or did I send that bill? Or did I do this? You can write it down and mark it off. And if people can access it, assuming not everybody's living in under the same roof, if people can access it like through Google Docs, that's even more helpful, because then they can see what needs to be done and say, hey, I'll take this, or I can help with this. And it can be super relieving, not necessarily empowering, relieving for the primary caregiver to go, oh my gosh, thank you. I've got some help. I can breathe. Now, in terms of losing empathy and compassion, we're going to start with talking about losing empathy and compassion for the caregivee, because it can become very easy when we start getting frustrated, when we start getting exhausted, to get angry at the caregivee for being needy, for being difficult. And stepping back and asking ourselves, what is this behavior in the caregivee communicating, can be really helpful to resolving the problem. Some of the triggers for people becoming difficult, and this can be a child or an adult, doesn't matter. They may be trying in some way to regain control, or in the case of adults, deny impending losses. Causes of this: the loss of control triggers stress in people. Most of us, when we lose control, it triggers the stress response. So we may become more irritable. When a child loses control over something, maybe they're worried about starting a new school, or maybe they're not feeling well. And when we don't feel well, don't feel like we're in control. We want to feel better, and we can't make it happen. The older adult may be starting to lose control of cognition or physical abilities. And that can trigger stress because they see themselves becoming more vulnerable. They may also have lack of sufficient information, understanding, or memory about their condition, which can contribute to increased fears. Whether this is a child who just got diagnosed with diabetes or an adult who just got diagnosed with dementia, they may not understand exactly what that means. It sounds bad, but what does it mean? And they may not understand what the progression is going to look like. Some people may just assume a catastrophe. For older adults, especially, memory also can be an issue. They may understand it right now, and 4 hours from now, they done forgot everything you said. And you need to repeat it. We talked about this a couple hours ago, but a lot of times if you say that, they're like, no, we didn't. So instead of going, remember, blah, 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 or we've already talked about this, just say, okay, let me help you understand what's going on. Visual can be helpful. If you can write simple things down, use pictures, having a visual representation in a book can be really helpful, or a spiral binder can be really helpful, especially for older adults. Strategies when people are feeling out of control: help them focus on what they can control. You may not be able to control, get how quickly you get better. You can't just magically make yourself feel better, but you can control the progression of the condition. You can control, for somebody with diabetes, there's a lot you can do to control your blood sugar and slow the progression. With dementia, there's a lot you can do to control inflammation and increase cognitive reserve to slow the progression. Help them identify what they feel powerless over and what the aspects of that they actually do have power. And do the same thing for yourself when you're feeling out of control. Focus on what you can control on this situation. If your caregivee is just in a bad mood, well, you may not be able to control that. What can you control? When my children were sick, when my mother was sick, it broke my heart to see them in pain. I couldn't control that. I did what I could to help them relax and feel better. But I had to remember, I can't control that. What can I do to improve the next moment for both of us? Focus on FIT-CAT-P. I know that's a new one. Facts in this context at this time and the probability of those things. They're possibility of just about anything. And you could spend all day trying to plan for possibilities. But what you want to do is look at the probabilities. Plan for probable losses if the person's willing, if they have dementia. You know that at some point they're going to start losing their memory. It may be 10 years from now, depending on, strategies they take. So planning on when that happens, what do you want to have occur? Work on advanced care planning, because then the person knows that when I start losing my memory or when I become incapacitated for some reason, I know that my loved ones don't have to make a decision about, should I do this or this? They know what I want. And that is super helpful for both parties. The caregiver is absolved of some of the responsibility, even though we may not like it. I hated when my mom signed her DNR, but I respected her wishes and I understood. I mean, she was very, very far along in the terminal process, and helping them understand that they have the ability to sort of dictate their care, even if they're not able to actively participate at that point, helps people feel a lot more in control and a lot less apprehensive about, well, what's this person going to do when? We know. We have the plan. And then once you've planned for those probable losses, you've set up that advanced care plan, live in the moment. Focus on what is going well right now. If you're caregiving for a child, oh my gosh, I think most of us parents have thought about it at times, the worst case scenarios, and we feel like the sky is falling or something. I can't predict what's going to happen. My son got his degree in IT, and we see IT jobs are just disappearing like crazy right now because of technology. I could worry about that. I could worry that he's not going to get a job in IT. Is that going to do me any good? Is that a good use of my time and energy? Heck to the no. So I need to live in the moment and focus on having empathy for where he's at right now, recognizing how stressful it is to be, trying to find a job in this economy, and living in the moment, appreciating him and doing what I can to improve the next moment. Not a week from now, not a year from now, but what can we focus on right now? And that can be very helpful when you are caregiving, even if you're not a full-time caregiver. Recognizing that, if you're of that ilk, you probably caregive for a lot of people. And at a certain point, you got to step back and go, I need to check in on me too. I need to live in the moment. That also means having compassion for myself and recognizing in the moment, I need a break. Sometimes caregivees may not be irritable. They may have no filter. And the technical term is disinhibition. They may say inappropriate jokes or comments. They make impulsive decisions. They may have emotional outbursts, reduced social inhibition, things that they normally wouldn't say, they say anyway or do anyway. And they may have difficulty reading social cues or have difficulty resolving conflicts, which strains relationships. Now, this sounds, when you read it, like you're pretty stereotypical 6 or 7 year old, but okay, we can teach these children to have a filter. When people get older, as dementia sets in, as stress sets in, as chemo disrupts the prefrontal cortex as well, their inflammation actually impacts the prefrontal cortex, and it can lead to some of these things happening. When people experience cognitive overload, they're trying to figure out too much stuff and they're just overwhelmed. It's just like, they have a hard time stepping back and thinking, is this the appropriate thing to say? Or they may be more impulsive because they just want it to stop. Okay. And we've all been there. We've all been there where we felt overloaded and we've done something or said something impulsive or maybe not as inhibited as we should have been. Reduced functioning in that prefrontal cortex. That's where all of our executive functioning, our reasoning, our planning, etc., and that connects to our emotion processing areas. And when that's not working as well, then our anxiety and our anger can actually sort of dominate. So we're in our emotional mind instead of our thinking mind. And disrupted sleep-wake cycles in caregivers and caregivees can contribute to stress, can contribute to systemic inflammation, and can contribute to all of these issues which can cause disruption in relationships. We need to recognize that physiological issues are contributing to what's going on. If it's a child, they don't have that filter yet. Their prefrontal cortex is still itty bitty compared to what it's going to be. We can help them grow that. For an adult, their prefrontal cortex may be shrinking as a result of aging, inflammation, disease. We need to depersonalize what's going on. A lot of times, it's not actually about us. I remember when I was sitting in my dad's hospice room with him, and we were sitting on the sofa and we were talking, and he said something, and I kind of smiled and laughed, and he's like, I never wanted to say anything about that, but that's just odd. What are you talking about, Daddy? And he, in his mind at that point, perceived my mouth to be too big for my face. And I was like, okay. Now you could say maybe he was saying you got a big mouth. Yeah, well, but ultimately, depersonalizing that. He wasn't trying, he even said it in a way where he wasn't trying to be critical. He was just letting me know that, that was a flaw with my face. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Dad. But it wasn't personal, and I couldn't take it personally. If somebody is being nasty, they're scared, they're angry, they're in pain, whatever, not taking it personally. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with their frustration that they're in pain and they can't fix it. Intervene with others as needed. And I've shared this one with you before. My mother, when she was, several months into her chemo, was in the hospital, and the orderly came in to do something, and she just read him the riot act because he didn't knock on the door. And she was telling him how rude he was and how he needed to go back in and try again. This is not my mother. This is not my mother at all. And I could hear it in the background because I was on the phone with my stepfather. And depersonalizing, and he needed to get off the phone so he could intervene. And hopefully the orderly had been trained to understand what was going on. But still, Walter stepped in and was like, Fran, it's okay. He's doing his job. And he was able to de-escalate her. But she wasn't herself. She never would have done that prior to cancer and chemo. She was a very sort of meek person a lot of times. And it's important to recognize that, sometimes you gotta, when you're having empathy and compassion, sometimes you gotta intervene with others as needed so they don't get angry. Help them get the lay of the land. Consider when your person is being disinhibited or irritable, Consider what fears or prior traumas the current situation is triggering for them. Is it triggering issues with biological needs? We all need to have our biological needs met. Are they worried that they're not going to get better? Are they worried that they're going to die? Are they worried that they're not going to get fed? Are they worried about their safety? Young children go through this whole period of separation anxiety where they cry when you leave because they're worried that you're not going to come back. They're worried that they're not going to be safe. And it's a natural developmental process. But we need to understand, instead of getting angry at the child for being clingy, understand that, hey, that's what's going on. For older adults, they may not feel safe when you leave. My grandfather had agoraphobia, crazy bad. And when my grandmother would go out to bingo, he would pace the floor for the 2 hours that she was gone. And if she wasn't home by 9:30, literally on the dot, he would start going into absolute panic mode because he didn't feel safe. They'd been together for 50 some odd years, and he didn't feel safe without her there, and he worried about her. He felt like it was his job to keep her safe, but he couldn't leave the house, and so he felt disempowered, and it was all this thing. Helping him understand what was going on and developing a plan between them. This was before cell phones, so it wasn't like she could just call him. But she could call before she left the bingo hall if they were running late. So there are things that we can do. And sometimes people are fearful of losing a sense of love and belonging. They're fearful that you're going to resent them. They're fearful that you're angry at them. And this is where it's important that we own our stuff. If we're in a bad mood, okay, we have a right to be in a bad mood sometimes. Everybody does. But we need to make sure that people understand, I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at the situation. I'm frustrated that you're in pain and there's nothing I can do to make it better. That goes such a long way with children and adults when we own our stuff because we're just exuding stress, and they may think that we're angry at them. And if we can say, it's not you, or it's not your fault, I feel frustrated because of this, it clears up that tension and it makes a world of difference. And we need to recognize that the caregivee is under a lot of stress as well and may not have the energy or ability to empathize. Kids, especially young children, don't have a good ability to empathize. As they get older, they may. But a lot of times we get into those teenage years and they have the ability to empathize, but not the energy because they're so stressed out about everything else that's going on at school with their friends, online, blah, blah, blah. So they're exhausted. Okay. The caregivee may not be being empathetic with you. It's not because they don't want to. It may be because they can't, they don't know how, or they don't realize that they're not being empathetic because they're all up in their own stuff. It can be helpful to tell the person, instead of saying, well, you should know how I feel, tell the person, I'm upset right now. Tell the person, this is going wrong right now. And they can say, wow, that must be frustrating. If a person is in pain and unable to communicate it effectively, children who have an ear infection, very young children, or somebody who has an older adult with a urinary tract infection, which happens a lot with older adults. They may not recognize the pain or be able to articulate it. So pay attention to their nonverbals. My son, whenever he would get an earache, he'd go around and he'd start holding his ear and rubbing his ear like this. And as soon as he started doing that, I knew something was wrong. He's still playing. He's still eating. You wouldn't otherwise be able to tell something was wrong, which I have no idea how his pain tolerance was that high. I get an earache and I am just like, I am the biggest baby when it comes to having an earache. I can't stand it. But he would hold his ear and then eventually he'd start getting fussier than normal. But that was my clue because he was nonverbal at that point. And with adults with UTIs, they may get crankier. They may refuse to go to the bathroom, or they may start going to the bathroom a lot. Looking for those clues that, hey, something may be a little wrong here, and then asking them if you can. Even young children, you can say, does your ear hurt? And, if the child is 2 or 3, they can process that. You can ask them, you seem like you're in pain. Is something hurting? Again, most people who are even mildly verbal can usually respond to a yes or no or point to where it hurts. In a lot of people, emotional pain will rarely be masked. When they're already stressed out because they're in pain or because they are, facing dementia or old age or cancer or something, they got enough on their plate. They're not worried about trying to cover up and hide how they feel. They're just putting it all out there a lot of times. Okay, so validate how they're feeling. I see that you are really ticked off today. Do you want to talk about it? Sometimes just acknowledging that can be really helpful. Seek support from counselors and faith leaders. If you're a caregiver and you're not a counselor by profession, seek support from people who are trained in this. You're not expected to do everything, to know everything, to be everything all the time to everybody. So reach out to people who could help. If your caregivee is irritable, if they're in pain, if they're having difficulty, call in somebody who's used to working with that population and try to get some consult. And worst case scenario, consult with their physician. If you think that, obviously, if they're in physical pain, consulting with their physician is the first step. But if it's an emotional pain, I'm not a huge fan of psychotherapeutics, but every once in a while, a sedative can be helpful if the person is experiencing intense grief or intense emotional upheaval and they're not sleeping, because the longer they go without sleeping, the worse all those other symptoms are going to get. But those medications are PRN or as needed. It's not something they have to take every day for the next, months or years. The caregiving may be fearful of expected losses. If they expect to lose, they expect to die, they're terminal, or they're old and they expect to die at some point. That can cause anxiety in some people. If they're fearful of a loss of functioning, that they won't be able to toilet themselves, or they're fearful of when their memory goes, that can be really challenging. It can also be fearful, or people can be fearful of losing those things in others. If my spouse, who's taken care of me for the past 50, 60 years, suddenly is not able to take care of me, that's terrifying. If my significant other dies, how am I going to function? If my significant other has to go live in memory care, how am I supposed to function? And that can be friends too, not just significant others. And then as far as their self losses, of course, they may fear their own death. They may fear loss of functioning and loss of their own memory. But a lot of people struggle with the loss of their self-concept because they saw themselves as vital and powerful and, whatever. And now they're starting to feel a little more frail. Now they can't do some of the things they used to do. And that can make them irritable. It can make them defensive. And the lack of choice. And we talked about this earlier. Making sure that people are involved as much as they can be in their choices about what they eat, about when they go to bed, about medical treatments that they may or may not use. Obviously, with young children, there's only so much they can do, but with older adults, trying to make sure that they know they've got choices and or that we will respect their care plan and the choices they've made. Caregivees can also get fearful because they're having hallucinations or delusions, whether it's because of lack of sleep or significant depression, a psychotic break, Parkinson's disease, dementia. There's a lot of things that can cause hallucinations and delusions, and they can be terrifying. Most people that I've worked with, and my family as well, as they've gotten close to death, have begun to start to hallucinate or see people or things in the room that the rest of us can't see. And that for some it's comforting, for some it's terrifying. We need to accept if they think they see something or if they are seeing something, we need to accept that and help them figure out, if you're feeling unsafe because of that, how can I help you feel safe? And again, they can be fearful of our rejection because they're too much of a burden or because they're too needy or whatever. We need to articulate to them that that's not it. You're good. For caregivers that are fearful of things, focus on FITCAT, facts in this context at this time. Encourage them to identify self-congruent activities. That is, activities that align with their sense of who they are. If they're gardeners, great. So let's go get some plants. Maybe we need to do raised gardening now. Maybe you can't be out in the pasture, but if gardening's important, maybe you can do some tabletop gardening. Empower choice through daily activities, making sure that they have an advanced care plan so they know that their choices will be respected. Focus on what is, not what could be, not what they're worried about, but what is, and knowledge that anxiety will only worsen most conditions, whether it's diabetes or dementia or depression. Anxiety and worrying about things only makes it worse. So are they going to use their energy to worry about this, which moves them away from what's important in their rich and meaningful life? Or are they going to use their energy to nurture the things that are important in their rich and meaningful life, using their energy to move toward? As I mentioned earlier, own your feelings and frustrations so people don't assume that you're angry at them. And arrange for monitoring and easy ways for the caregiver to reach you or help if they feel afraid. If you need to go to the grocery or you're not there 24 hours a day, how can they reach you if they are concerned? And cell phones, the medical alerts, video cameras, there's a lot of different tech that can be used to help people feel like they've got a lifeline, even if somebody's not physically there right then. Resentments towards caregivers' current demands on time. If the person feels, or if the caregiver feels like they shouldn't have to be caregiving, that's an issue that they've got to deal with themselves. If the caregiver feels like they're being manipulated, and again, that's feels like, backing out to fact-based reasoning. Yeah, maybe you are being manipulated, but what's the reason? Why are they trying to manipulate you? What's their goal? Generally, the goal is so they feel safe, so they feel like they won't be abandoned. Some caregivers become resentful because the caregivee wants them to do something for or with them constantly. Every time you get up to try to go to the bathroom or you want to take 30 minutes to read a book, the caregivee is like, no, you need to play with me, or no, you need to do this with me. And we see that in all ages. As people feel less empowered, they may demand more attention. And sometimes it's warranted, and other times we need to empower them to be able to self-soothe. You can get resentful towards your caregivee because you were already overloaded, and thinking about taking care of somebody else is just more than you can bear. You may be rewarding the behavior by not setting limits with them and saying, you know what? I would love to play a game of checkers with you in 30 minutes. Right now, I need to do this, but in 30 minutes, I am all yours. The caregiver's feelings of fear of being alone can cause them to be needy. And prior issues, If you grew up with this person that you're taking care of and they were a crappy parent, call it what it is, you may resent having to give them all the things that they never gave you. And it sounds harsh, but let's just talk about what is. And understanding that, figuring out how you're going to deal with these resentments so they don't eat you alive, and so you don't end up inadvertently taking them out on the caregivee. Examine your rich and meaningful life and what you can and are willing to do, and potential regrets or guilt for refusing all help. Now, refusing to do everything all the time, that is good boundaries. But if you say, no, I'm not going to take care of mom and dad, too bad, go to a home, whatever, you're on your own. All right, that's a choice. That's a choice you can make. Are you going to potentially have any regrets or guilt later on if you refuse to help? Only the person can answer that. The caregiver should find options to reduce the things that they should be doing. You can handle certain things, but what else can you divide? What can you delegate so you are not the one that's responsible 24/7, 365? Caregivers should recognize caregivee anger as a possible attempt to try to feel secure. I'm getting angry with you because you're not doing it right. And that may be that caregivee's way of saying, I feel fearful and I need you to set limits, or I need you to try to fix it for me, even though it doesn't feel that way at the time. Be mindful of how your resentment as a caregiver impacts your ability to caregive and each piece of your life. Set clear boundaries and limits. And when you're working with the person, create win-wins. I'm happy to do this for you, and I need 30 minutes before we do this. So it's a win-win. I'll play the game with you or do whatever, but first I need to do this so we both get what we want. It's important to be mindful of all things in your rich and meaningful life, except that you cannot do everything for everyone all the time. That's just a straight up cognitive distortion. You can't do it. Be mindful of the things that are out of your control and what is in your control. Recognize the impact of exhaustion, not just resentment, but exhaustion on each piece of your life. Physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, and environmental. I know when I get exhausted, my house my housekeeping goes down a bit. And focus each day on trying to take note of the positives. We want to have compassion for other caregivers who may be dealing with similar issues but have different thresholds. When my son would cry, my husband could handle walking with him and rocking him and stuff for longer than I could. I would start to get frustrated after about 45 minutes. And when I would get frustrated, Sean's stress would ramp up too, my son. So we recognized that there are some things that I can deal with really well, and I have a higher threshold, other things that he has a higher threshold for. And so he didn't get frustrated with me for that, for not being able to hold Sean as long as he could. And I didn't get frustrated with him for other things. The other caregivers may have other issues that make it more difficult to assist. So synergize. Maybe they don't have the same skills that you do, or maybe they're not comfortable doing something. Okay, so what can they do? Maybe they can cook. Maybe they can recreate with the person. Maybe they're better at de-escalating the person than you are. And understanding and using each person's skills to their max. They may have different resources. Maybe they just don't have the time to help right now. They've got 6 kids at home and they're working 2 jobs. Okay. What else might they be able to contribute? Maybe them and their 6 kids can come over on Sunday and sit with the caregivee for an hour. And they may have other demands and this includes health demands. If they've got poor health, they may not be able to help as much as somebody who's healthy. And they may have different approaches when you're being compassionate with other caregivers. If you're the one that's usually caregiving and they come in and try to do something and they do it differently than you do, the first response may be to correct them. That's not compassionate. We need to step back and recognize that there may be multiple ways to handle this situation and reflect on whether we need to be right or we need the help. Caregivers need to identify how other caregivers can help, not how they're failing. So what can this person do to help me out? We want to validate the other caregiver's experience, avoid engaging in mind reading. We need to try to avoid fixing something or someone that's been broken for a very long time. If the other caregiver's relationship with their parent is just, it's always been awful, now's not the time to try to make peace or tell them how to feel. We just need to let that go. And we need to accept that people have different values. And this is more for you. If the person's values are more centered on their own family and making money than it is on taking care of your mom and dad, okay. That's not for me to tell you your values are wrong. They're just different than mine. And I'm going to approach things differently. If you're a caregiver for someone, adult or child, and there are other people in your house, they may act out. Other people, including spouses, children, etc., they may act out because they feel resentful, abandoned, rejected, or lonely because caregiving takes so much out of you, physically, interpersonally, emotionally, cognitively, and financially. They may also feel like a burden because you're so worn out and they feel guilty for having their own needs. And we see this in families with babies, new children in the family, and we see this with older adults. What we want to do as caregivers is praise the positive. What is that person doing right? Allow or empower them to assist you in caregiving for the caregivee. Connect authentically with them on a daily basis. Sit down, look them in the face, have a meaningful discussion for 5 minutes. How are you doing? I care. I'm here for you. Use their love language daily. And this can be really helpful. You just make a list of things that you can do for them that use their love language or love languages. And then each day just go to the list and say, okay, I'll do that one today. That keeps you from having to think of, well, what can I do? And communicate in the and. And what I mean by this is I have to take care of grandma today and I want to spend time with you. So this evening we'll do this. Communicate in the and. I have to caregive and I can still do this with this compromise. Recharge. If you're worn down, it increases your stress hormones and wears you down further. Set aside time each day for self-care and recharging, whether it's when the caregivee takes a nap or right after a meal when they're kind of full and maybe they can occupy themselves, after they go to bed, or when someone else is there to help. There is always time you can carve out. There is no I can't. It's an I choose not to. If you're not recharging, if you're not trying to recharge, you're choosing not to. Evaluate your rich and meaningful life and make a list of things you can choose from each day to recharge and reconnect, to avoid losing yourself in this whole caregiving process. And pick one of those things to do each day. We also want to address a reduced sense of self-efficacy and negative self-talk and criticism. This happens a lot with caregivers. We're protecting or caring for or in charge of someone who's vulnerable. And we don't want something bad to happen on our watch. We don't want to feel like we're responsible for something bad happening. During times of vulnerability, if you remember back to the oxytocin video, during times of vulnerability, oxytocin actually increases the salience and experience of stress because we're in mama bear mode or papa bear mode. When you're paying more attention to the problems or the stressors, it can reduce your sense of efficacy, your sense of ability to handle things, and increase negative self-talk because you're focusing on the things that you did wrong or what could go wrong, and it starts to feel really overwhelming. In order to address that, recognize what you do and do not have the power to control and how taking responsibility for something that you cannot control leads to toxic guilt. If I take responsibility for the fact that it's raining today, I'm using a lot of energy being angry at myself for something I have no control over. That's toxic. Spend 20 minutes per day noticing what you did well and what the caregivee did well. The other 23 hours and 40 minutes, focus on whatever you want. But 20 minutes a day is a happy place. Reach out to others for education or support to improve your skills in areas you're not doing well. For example, with children, managing tantrums. With adults, managing sundowning. Define and set small goals for effectiveness. If I'm going to be an effective caregiver, what does that actually look like realistically? And set those small goals. Maybe it means I'm a little more patient tomorrow. Maybe it means I actually take some time out for me to recharge tomorrow. And check the source and validity of any negative self-talk and rephrase in a way that you would say to a friend. Most of us are really good at negative self-talk. So when we hear ourselves being ugly to ourselves, check the source. Are you saying that to yourself, or are you hearing something from the past, like what your mother said or your grandmother said or the TV said? And regardless of where it comes from, how valid is that? Is that an accurate criticism right now, or is that just being nitpicky and hateful? And then if you need to rephrase it, which hopefully you do, then rephrase it in a way that you would say to a friend. Because a lot of times we're not going to say things to a friend that we tell ourselves. We wouldn't dream of being that ugly to them. And when we are caregiving, a lot of times we feel like we lack support from others. Notice I said feel. Strategies to address that. Identify the type of support you need. Figure out what it is you need to feel supported and whether you have communicated it to people who can help. If you're calling your sister who lives in Oregon to tell her that you need help with, getting the groceries, well, she can't help you. You need to be calling the grocery store and going, I need somebody to bring me my groceries. So have you communicated your need? And have you communicated it to somebody who actually can help you? Reflect on whether you're seeking support for something that is unreasonable. Maybe you want somebody to come in and radically change the situation. This person's just being cantankerous. You need to come in and fix it. I need you to help me fix it. Well, there may be no making that person nice at this point. They may just be cantankerous. And explore whether you're supporting yourself and maintaining your own boundaries. If you're feeling a lack of support, it may be because you're giving in. Instead of saying, no, I need you to come over and take the night shift, you say, okay, fine, I'll do the night shift. No worries, no big deal. It's a big deal. And by not enforcing those boundaries, then you're allowing people to take advantage, and you're going to feel unsupported. You only have so much time and energy in a given day, and caregiving takes a lot of energy, which means some energy needs to be diverted from elsewhere. Caregiving is like having a second job, or a third for some people. As caregivers become more exhausted, they become less efficient and effective at managing each piece of life, which negatively impacts their self-concept, their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, their belief they can actually do something, their relationship with involved others, people who are involved in that other's care, and relationships with uninvolved others, their relationships with their friends that they used to hang out with. And it negatively impacts their ability to be empathetic, compassionate, and supportive of self and others. Overall, we want to help people caregivers focus on using mindfulness of their needs and the facts in this context at this time. We want to help them depersonalize, seek support from others, and synergize using other people's strengths where you have weaknesses. Empower the caregivee and those around you to participate in the process. A lot of times they can do more for themselves than we give them credit for. Make schedules, lists, or plans that can be shared among all the caregivers to reduce cognitive load. Set limits while ensuring others they are safe. I got this, but I need to set these limits. Create win-wins and carve out time for self-care and to nurture an aspect of your rich and meaningful life each day. Yeah, it may only be 30 minutes, but that's still 30 minutes. Focus on what you and other people can control, not what's out of your control. Spend time each day focusing on what went right and celebrate those small victories. All of these can help reduce stress, increase a feeling of empowerment, and reduce or prevent burnout in caregivers. Are there any questions? You are quite welcome, Jody. Hello, Jay Holmes. You are welcome, Katie. Glad you were here. And that's a hard decision to make, Paula, when you decide, you know what? That's fine. I'll take a back seat. I'll let you be in control. But sometimes that can take a whole lot less energy than trying to be the one directing everything and fighting for who's going to be in control. Alrighty, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next week, same time, same station.